Okay, so this review collector question, I thought was a really good example of something that you might see on the AP test come May 15th. I think the College Board was thinking the same thing because they recommended students do it. So that's why I selected it. Again, if you didn't get to it for some reason, do I need to disable annotations? It looks like people are drawing on my screen there. Okay. So anyway, I put it up here because it was a new question from this year's practice exam. So I put it up right here, 2020 product review on Replit. It looks like a good amount of people checked it out. I had a couple emails with questions about it. This was a great example because it's an array list of objects, and they're saying that the 25-minute question you get, the one that's going to be worth 65% of your grade on May 15th, is going to be a question like this one. So hopefully you guys got a good look at it. If you didn't get a good look at it, you maybe want to take a good look at it soon. But essentially, there's two classes kind of working together in this review collector question. There's a product review class and there's a review collector class. Now, a quick tip for those of you that are struggling on free response questions. They've said that the 25-minute question on May 15th is going to be actually a pretty long question, like either a full-length free response question or maybe even more than a usual free response question, because they're trying to make it long to try to dissuade people from cheating or make it hard to cheat, essentially. So I would make sure that, you know, here's a quick tip that I do when I'm doing these. I'll read the text here, this part about what's going on, but then I don't read the class because I don't have any context for what these classes are just yet. So I actually skip reading all the code and stuff like that until I actually read the question, have some context. So for this one, I came down to part A, and mine is drawn up a little bit. I actually did this one with a tutoring student during the week after my school work hours. I don't want you to think I'm double dipping or anything like that. But so I was tutoring somebody digitally, and we did this question together. So I've got it marked up. It says you're writing this add review method, which adds a single product review represented by a product review object to the review collector object. And then it'll add the product name to a list if that product name is not already in the list. So I've kind of got my answer here. You can check it out. I'm not saying it's a perfect answer. Essentially, you're going to add the product review no matter what. So I've got this review list.add first up here. These questions are trying to test, do you understand that an array list holds objects, and that those objects, you need to call methods on them to get to their data. A lot of times a question like this, or the word pair list one that you also had assigned this week, people look at, see that there's a string involved and just go, oh, it's array list of strings, I can just get it and access its data directly. No, you have to use get on it and then use, like, for example, get name in this case, or get review, which you have to use in a later part of this question. So I thought this was a great question. Again, it's really testing, do you understand, first of all, iterating, looping over a list in this case, and then second of all, do you understand how to call methods on objects? And do you understand what it means for an object to be part of a list or part of a collection? So first part, I added the product review to the list. I actually then went back up to my code and go, okay, what does review list contain? Oh, review list contains product review type objects. You can see I annotated it there. So I made sure that I added a product review type object to review list. And then the second part of the question says there's another list, just a list of products, essentially their names, and you're only supposed to add that the product review's name to the list if it's not already in there. So what I did first was I got the name of the product review, and then it was kind of a tough question that I was talking to the student about. How are you going to add it to this other list only if it's not already in there? And there's a couple ways you could go about it. What I did, or what we did, I suppose, was I made a counter variable here, and essentially any time that the name of this product review showed up in the product list, I incremented this counter. Now, obviously, if that counter is more than 0 after I exit the loop, that must mean there's one or more reviews that already have that name. But if it's still at 0, that means there were no reviews that had that name, so I could go ahead and add it to the list. So that's essentially what I have going on. Now, what are other ways you could have done it? You could have had a Boolean variable that you start out as false, and down here you could just say if name dot equals product list dot get I, then you could say then make that Boolean variable true. And so it's either going to be false at the end if it was never raised, if it never met any matches, or it'll be raised up to true if you find any matches at any point during your traversal of that array list. It's kind of very similar to what I'm doing here, but the idea is how do you only add something if it's not already in the list? And so I used a counter. There's other ways to do it. Now, the scoring guidelines you did not have access to, so I'm pulling them up right now here so you can kind of look at what they were looking for Part A. The College Board's given answer for this question actually used a Boolean variable, and they used an enhanced for loop, which I thought was fine. They used an enhanced for loop, which is just fine because you're just looking at these strings here and trying to find a match. And somebody asked, is there a contains method for array lists? I believe there is. I don't know if it's part of the actual AP subset, and I always try to, well, I know it's not part of the actual AP subset. I always try to write my answers using methods that I know are part of the AP subset, but I suppose there might be a dot contains, there probably is a dot contains method for array list. Contains array list Java. Let's see, contains in ArrayList Java is used for checking if the specified element exists in the given list or not. So it looks like there is one. Now, if you know that, that's great. And on the AP test, you could actually definitely use the ArrayList contains. But again, in my solutions, I try to stay away from stuff that's not part of the AP subset. Really quick here, the rubric that they have for this question. I just want to say there's nothing wrong with using that method, though. You can definitely use it if you know how to use it for sure. Their rubric, adding a product review to the review list, getting the product name of a review to be added. This is basically, first of all, do you know how to use the add method on a list? Okay. Then the second point, do you know to call the get name method on a product review object? Again, that's testing. Do you understand that it's not just an array list of strings, but an array list of objects? And you basically have to unwrap those objects using their getter methods to get the data out of them. 1 point for traversing product lists with no bounds errors. On all the questions this week, there was a point for that, traversing an array list. Every single question you had this week had at least 1 point involved with just traversing an array list. Can you write a for loop that will go through an array list? That should be really comforting to some of you, and it should be alarm bells going off that I need to know how to use a for loop on an array list when it comes to May 15th for this AP test. 1 point, comparing name and product list with name from review to be added. You better use dot equals. Don't be using equals equals. Use dot equals to compare objects, to compare strings. 1 point for adding new product name to the product list. So that's done down here. And then 1 point for correctly adding the product name to product list if and only if the product name is not already in the product list. So whether you used a counter like I did in my solution, or if you use this Boolean variable, this is actually a method called a one-way flag variable. They started at false, and it can only change to true. So it's false, and they call it one-way flag because it's false like this, and anytime you find a match, it's raised to true, and it can't be lowered back down to false. That's why they call it a one-way flag, essentially. I used a counter in my solution that I was showing off here. Showing off makes it sound very boastful. I was just demonstrating to you guys what we came up with for this question. So I just had a counter, and anytime I found a match, I incremented that counter. And at the end, I said if the counter's still at 0, that means that there were no matches, and so add it to the list. So that was the first part of this question here. And so this part was worth 6 points. That's actually pretty hefty for a two-part question, having one part worth six points. But I think there's a lot of solace in this question too, and a lot of comfort seeing that, well, were you able to add an object to a list? That's a point. Were you able to just loop over the list? That's a point. And again, another addition down here was worth a third point, even if you didn't check correctly if it should be added. So you could have gotten half the points with really only realizing how to add something to an array list and loop over an array list, which is hopefully pretty comforting for you folks. It's comforting to me when I'm reading the scoring guidelines. If you're just showing up, by the way, I'm doing the review collector question that was on the document here. This one, 2020, the newest question. Part B, you were supposed to write this get num good reviews method. If you didn't read this part yet, essentially what get num good reviews was you looked through the whole list of reviews, and if you found a object that has the same name as the one you were given, then you're supposed to check if the review for that product contains best. And if it does, then you increment some counter. You count up the number of reviews that had this product name and had best in the review somewhere. If it did, you return the number there. And it even says it works for if it contains asbestos. Now that's pretty scary to me. If a review contains asbestos, it's probably not a very good product. Unless it's asbestos, then you get what you pay for on the tin there, right? Anyway, so this, again, another question with a counter. A lot of these questions involve counter, counting up the number of evens, the number of odds, the number of this, that, or the other thing. So I've incremented a counter. I've gone through the review list using a for loop, and I've got a really chained together if statement here, which I'm not sure best practices. I don't know how readable it is, but essentially I'm saying first you need to make sure this product name equals the name of one of the elements from the review list. So that's what I've got going on here. If the product name is equal to the name of an element in the review list. And again, you'll notice I did review list.getI.getName. You have to peel back those layers. Review list alone is just an array list of product reviews. Review list.getI is actually a product review object. Review list.getI.getName, now you've got a string that represents the name of that product review. So again, do you realize that it's an array list of objects and not just an array list of strings? That came up on word pair as well. And then, so I said, if the name matches, if the names are equal, then I need to see if the review at that spot contains best. Now, how do you check to see if one string contains another string? Well, if you remember back to doing that chat bot, Magpie, there's a lot of index of going on. An index of is one of those methods that's part of the AP subset. If you're not familiar with index of, remember the way that, well, I didn't do a very good job teaching it then, but the way that index of works is you call it on a string, and if the string you put in the parentheses, in this case best, is contained in the string that you're calling it on, then it gives you back the number index where it starts. So it could start right at the beginning, which would be 0, or it could start anywhere later on in the string, which would be some positive number. Index of also returns -1 if the string that you put in the parentheses is not contained in the string that you called index of on. So I said, if the review basically has best in it, then increment the counter. Now, I think somebody asked in the chat, is there a .contains method for array list? We looked it up. Yes, there is. There is also a .contains method for strings. It basically does the same part as what I just underlined right here. It just says, is the string in the other one, it's just a true or false. So then you don't need to use any greater than or equal to or any inequality symbols. So you could use dot contains here, but again, it's not part of the AP subset. I always try to use solutions that, or I write solutions that only use stuff that's part of the AP subset. So I use dot index of. You would not be marked down. You would not be wrong if you use dot contains. You can definitely use tools as long as they're part of standard Java. You can't say, oh, up at the top, I'm going to write import this obscure library that nobody else knows about except for me and my script writing friends and whatever. You can't do something like that. But dot contains would be totally legal to use. I just use dot index of for this one. Now again, you see, and I actually drew it out over here, you have to peel back the layers of obscurity in this question. A review list is a list. You can't get data and compare data from that list. So then I use .getI, that gives me an object from the list. On that object, I use .getReview. That gives me the review of the object at index I in the review list. And then on that string representing the review, I use index of, which gives me a number. So you can see I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 different things happening on that line. There's probably ways you could write that a little bit more readable, but I believe it works there. But the idea is, do you understand that it's not just a list of strings, it's a list of these objects that contain different data. And so again, a couple times I had to scroll back up and I had to look at this product review list and realize how the puzzle pieces fit together. The review collector class contains an array list of product reviews. Where can I find a definition of product reviews? It's right here. It might be a dead giveaway to you if they give you a class and you have not used that class. Something might have gone wrong there. It's very uncommon for them to give a red herring like that. So again, that's the solution that I came up with. Make a counter, loop through the review list. If any of the elements have the same name as the product name that I was given, then check if the review contains contains best, and if it does, increment my counter. The scoring guidelines, which I may or may not supposed to be showing, it's unclear to me at least. For getting them good reviews, here's the canonical solution, aka the solution that they came up with when they were actually writing this question. They again used an enhanced for loop. Would you get marked down if you used a regular for loop like I did? No. You can use a regular for loop anytime you see an enhanced for loop, for sure. It just means that you have to do .get and stuff like that. So there's the answer they came up with. I think it looks relatively the same. They have a counter. Theirs is a little bit more verbose than mine. They wrote an enhanced for loop. They said if the product name is equal, then they have this nested if statement like I do. They used a few variables to help them make their lines, their if statements a little bit shorter. That's fine. But again, you're never going to be graded in these AP tests on how beautiful is your code. You're going to be just graded on whether or not your code works. The scoring for this one, look at this, 1 point for traversing review lists. What does that mean? Can you write a for loop on an array list? That's 2 out of 9 points on this question alone that are just, can you write a for loop on an array list? 1 point for selecting all and only reviews with matching product names that contain best. Again, we said you could use index of. That's the way they're looking for, because index of is part of the AP subset. You could use .contains if you're familiar with that method, but you don't have to. And then 1 point basically is saying, did you do the rest of this correct? You will notice that you would lose a point if you use square brackets on an array list. I would be really careful when you're doing this question. Look and see if it's an array list or an array. If we're dealing with an array list, then we have to use .get, .set, .add, .remove, whatever. If you're dealing with an array, hopefully I said array list before. If you're dealing with an array, then you'd have to use your square brackets, your sub-i's or whatever there. So that's 3 points. And the first part was worth 6. So that was the first question, and I ran mine through the tester here just to make sure it worked just fine, and I got it looked like it passed. So if you didn't do this question yet, I'd recommend you do it, check it out, and there's a replit that you can run it on with some tests, and it'll tell you if you successfully passed or not. It doesn't show up on my end, but who are who are you doing this for? You're doing this for yourself, obviously, hopefully. So that was the second question. Any questions on that one? Maybe in the chat, if you have a question on the review collector one. And it was this 2020 question, product review. I'll give you guys a few seconds if you have a question to type it in, and then I'm going to move on to the other two just really quick, talking about the scoring guidelines in general. You don't need to see me read through something you've already read through or done. Looks like we're really in this thing for the long haul, huh? 15 more days after April 30th, at least. Probably more, right? Let's be honest. Huh. I hope everybody's safe and well. Not to complain, but my wife and I were going to go to Glacier National Park, and that got canceled, which is totally understandable. People got to be safe and healthy. I totally get that. So that was kind of a bummer, but understandable. Who knows? Probably I'm going to need the money now. I don't know. Okay, I don't see any questions in chat on this one unless I'm missing something. So I'm just going to briefly talk about the scoring guidelines on the other two questions. Word pair and digit, these were array list problems from the last couple of years here. I always try to start with questions that are more recent. So that's usually kind of the direction that they're going in. Here's the scoring guidelines for the 2018 question, word pair. Oh, by the way, this document is available. If you didn't get to it yet, it's on the FR. I've got the FR scoring guidelines right here, so you could look at it. I know that people are only looking at those after they're done with the questions, which is great, because the College Board told me they're not going to give you the scoring guidelines to do the questions. I know it's a bummer. But anyway, what I wanted to bring up with both of these questions, they declared the array list up at the top, but they had not yet instantiated it. You were writing constructors for both 2018 and 2017, the word pair list problem and the digit list problem. So I wanted to bring that up really quickly because if you see that an array list is declared and you're writing the constructor, you can't add or remove or size or anything to that array list until it's actually instantiated. And both the 2018 and the 2017 questions had declared an array list but hadn't yet instantiated it. And that was worth 1 point on both questions. And it kind of feels like a gotcha. What do you mean I have to go ahead and instantiate it? Why would you not instantiate it for me? Well, that's a really common thing to do with when you have an instance variable that's an object or something like that, declare it up above, and then only allocate the memory when you create an object. So on word pair list, it looked like this right here. You know what? I'm going to close this tab. I've got too many tabs open, to be honest. And then for 2017's digit question, let me pull that up as well. 1 point for constructing digit list. So you got to be careful when you're doing these questions. If you have to write a constructor or something like that, and you have an instance variable that's an array or an array list that's only been declared, make sure you first instantiate it before you actually try to do any operations on it. Otherwise, what error? Null pointer exception. So for this one, very similar, digit list equals new array list integer. For this one, it was all pairs equals new array list word pair. Really quickly, I wanted to talk about how are you going to study? How are you going to be ready for this thing? They said it's open notes and all that stuff. Sorry, I thought somebody was delivering something. As they said, it's going to be open notes. So what notes are you going to use? I think if you make your own review sheet, that's going to be a lot more useful for you for several reasons. First of all, you can format it however you want to. If there's something you really struggle on, put it up at the top, put it in color, put it in a way that you recognize it best. Number two, you're going to be more familiar with it. If you're just printing out some random, Java cheat sheet, or God forbid, looking it up on the day of the test, you're looking at for the first time, you're trying to use a tool and you've only got 25 minutes to read the question, do the question, and look at this new tool that you've never looked at before, I think that's not a good idea. And it's in a format you've never seen. So I would highly recommend you guys um, make your own review list for this stuff. For the last couple of weeks, two things that you should have, that you would want to have on your review list. First of all, array lists. What stuff about array lists? Well, let's think. First of all, how to loop over it. We've seen that there's points on all of these questions about array lists, how to loop over an array list. Sometimes more than 1 point per question on being able to loop over an array list. Number two, how to access an element in the context of a loop. Number three, I would have something like, how do you access the first element? How do you access the last element? That's something that comes up a lot of times. The index is the size of the array list minus one. Then you probably have some other stuff on there, like the six methods that you need to know for array lists. What are they? Add with two parameters, remove, set, get, and size. I think that's all six of them. And maybe some other ones that you think will be helpful for you. Maybe if you look up .contains and you go, oh, that's really useful, I might be able to use that. If you totally understand how it works, you could add that to your note sheet. Then with strings, there's a couple methods you want to know. Obviously, we want to know substring. We want to know index of. We want to know equals. This week, you had a code HS problem that used compare to. You need to know that one as well. So I would be highly recommending that you make your own review sheet. They say it is open test, open internet, open book, everything like that. But do you want to be flipping through a book when you only got 25 minutes to do this long question? You're already under pressure, and then your internet doesn't start working, or God forbid, something else starts happening. Your younger brother starts crying while you're in the middle of this test trying to figure out this new cheat sheet, review sheet, whatever. Don't call it a cheat sheet. You know what I mean. It's just short for, okay. So the scoring guidelines on those ones are pretty similar here. There's a lot of points that are similar between the 2 years. Constructing the list, being able to compare elements in the list and all that stuff. I just want to be clear, when you see these canonical solutions that they have, you don't have to do it in that way. In fact, this one has some wacky stuff going on for digit list. They use the capital I integer classes constructor. We talked about it this year. You can just say digit list.add 0. That's fine. They used it in two different places here, which was kind of wacky. Then they did this weird .int value. We know that an array list of integers, capital I integers, will just automatically be unboxed for you, so you don't need that in your solution. They actually use .int value in two different places. You don't need to use that. You can just say digit list.get I plus 1. I would think it's kind of weird if you have .int value in your answer, honestly, unless you looked up or something. One thing I want to talk about in digits, there is this one part where you're constantly chopping off the rightmost digit and adding it to the list. Yes, that's easy to do with strings, but how do you do it with an integer? If you mod by 10, that gives you the rightmost digit, and then if you divide equals by 10, it chops off the rightmost digit. And if you keep doing that, mod by 10 to get the rightmost digit, divide by 10 to get rid of the rightmost digit, you'll keep paring your number down until you get to 0. There is one issue though. In this digits question, they gave you an example of what if the number is 0, then you should have a list of 0. So that method doesn't really work. When I'm looking at a free response question and I look at the examples, if I see an example that's kind of wacky, or an example that maybe I feel like at first doesn't add much, I usually go, oh, they must be trying to show me something with this example. And in the digits question, they showed you the example of it being 0. Let me close my my review collector one, and I think I've got up my solutions that I did. That's the wrong one. So for digits, mine I think looks relatively similar. I constructed the digit list. I looped through. I said, while it's now I made a variable called rightmost digit. You didn't have to do that. The one trick to this though is when you mod by 10, it's giving you the rightmost digit, sure, but if you just add that to the end of the list, it's going to actually reverse the the number. So that's why when we do the adding, I use the 2-parameter add method, so it always adds it to the beginning. If you add the rightmost digit to the beginning, then it'll put the number in the correct order at the very end, essentially, because then the numbers will keep shifting to the right to make room for the next rightmost digit, and so on and so forth. Then the second part, it was a little tricky to see if it was strictly increasing. You just had to see if the element to the left is greater than or equal to the element to its right. The one point that's most commonly missed on the second part of digits is an out of bounds error. Probably the most common error when you're programming is called an off by one error. And that's when you write a loop that goes one too many times. If I'm checking the element at index I and the element at index I plus 1, when I get to the very end of the list, there's nothing at I plus 1 over here. So I run out of elements. I get an index out of bounds exception at that point. So that's why mine has this digit list dot size minus 1 in that case. Some other people thought of this question as starting at index 1 and comparing it to the element to its left. That's fine as well. As long as it works, that's all the College Board's looking for. So that's what I ended up with on that question. The other question was this word pair list question. I actually thought word pair list was very similar to the review collector question, because you have an array list of these objects, and how do you peel off the information about them? You have to use the getter methods, get first and get second. They showed you the word pair class. Why are they showing you the word pair class? Because they're trying to tell you that all pairs contains word pair objects, and you need to do stuff. In fact, I think you need to use pretty much everything from the word pair class in this question. You needed to use the get first, get second, and you had to construct objects of that class as well. Here's the answer that I came up with for this one. I actually struggled a little bit coming up with the algorithm. If you didn't do this question, it gives you an array of words, and you're supposed to make pairs, all possible pairs inside of that array of words. It's a great question because it's got looping through an array, it's got looping through array lists, it's got objects, it's got construct, it's got everything. I mean, what else could you ask for? What do you get for the question that has everything? This question had a little bit of everything. So again, I constructed my list because it was only declared, it wasn't yet instantiated. And then I said, write one loop that pulls out the first word in the pair, and the J loop pulls out the second words in the pair. And so start at the 0th word, add all of them, then start at the 1th word, add all of them, and so on and so forth. I tried to make mine readable by adding these variables. You did not have to create these first and second variables if you didn't want to. I just thought it made it a little bit more readable. You could have probably combined all 4 of these lines into a single line if you wanted to, if you're a one-line convert or whatever. But I pulled out the first word, the second word, I made a word pair, and then I add them to the list. Again, a lot of people could think that this all pairs list just contains strings. It doesn't just contain strings, it contains word pair objects. So if I want to add something to that list, I have to make a word pair object first, then I can add it to the list. So that was the first part there. The second part, you were just looking for basically word pairs in the list that had the first word and second word the same. And so I just, again, wrote a for loop over the pairs, or excuse me, a for loop over the indices. I pulled out one word pair at a time using the get method. On that pair, I called get first and get second to get the first and second words in that pair. And then if those two were equal, I incremented some counter, and then I returned it at the very end. Again, you probably could have combined these 4 lines into one. I was just trying to make my solution as readable as possible. If you haven't gotten to any of these questions yet, you'll notice that the due date is tonight at 11:59. You can still go in and do it. And if you're wondering why is Mr. Foster giving me the scoring guidelines and all that stuff and going over the question before it's due, frankly, at this time, if you are trying then you're doing, and you're participating, and you're engaged, even if you're trying, even if you have to, look at the answer a little bit. Now, I would prefer that you're able to do them on your own. You should prefer that for yourself as well. Um, but if you're trying, then you're fine. And so those were those two questions that I assigned from the classroom. And again, I would highly recommend you make your own kind of study guide on, what stuff do you see show up a lot? Being able to traverse array lists, being able to create objects, being able to get elements of array lists, being able to call methods on those objects in the array list, stuff like that. What do you struggle on? Put it on a note sheet, put it in a notebook, organize it well in case it's something that you need on test day. That being said, hopefully on test day, it just can come right off the top of the dome piece onto the paper or onto the whatever, and you're able to do it. Um, One last thing I want to say about these before we move on, you can type questions in the chat if you have them. Um, I did all these questions on paper first, and then I transferred them into Replit. And at this point, we don't know. They're still going to tell us more about the test on April 28th, apparently, the formatting and everything. I just highly recommend writing stuff out by hand, because then if you run out of time or something, you're not going to be worried about it compiling or not compiling, or being legal code, or your typing speed or something like that. Now, could you type them out? As far as I know at this point, you could type them out. You could run them in JGrass. You could do them in Replit for all I know up to this point. We're supposed to get more information on the 28th about the formatting. I actually do have a practice that I'm going to assign at some point that is supposed to be done in 25 minutes, including the open-ended question part. But we'll get to that maybe a little bit later. As far as the free response goes, one more thing. These types of questions on array list that we've been looking at for the last 3 weeks or so. They said that question type, an array list of objects, possibly including an array like this one did, will be the first question that's worth 65% of your score. It'll be the one that you get 25 minutes on. We are going to switch next week into looking at the second type of question, which they said is control structures, loops, and calling methods, and we'll be able to talk about that. But these array list questions are, again, the type of question that they say will be worth the most points on the test there. So those are all the Replit ones, and I don't see any questions in chat. If you want to type one in, I'll give you another couple seconds here, and then I can do a couple Code HS after that. Every time I get the opportunity to do one of these, I just want to be clear. It makes me realize how much I miss, I'm being completely sincere, how much I miss being in the classroom with you guys. Because this is like not my preferred way to teach, probably not your preferred way to learn. Who wants to look at this mug all day? I guess you'd have to do that. Well, usually in our classroom, you're not facing me, so thank goodness for you and your eyes. But I was like helping one of my friends' kids with math the other day. I'm just like, remotely over Facebook, video or whatever. And it's just like, I really miss teaching you guys. So some Code H. Okay, so I don't see any requests on these. I'm going to switch to Code HS here. And let me see, this is me. I'm not trying to flex on anybody with my 51%. Don't take it like that. I'm going to try to look at as many of these that you guys are putting in chat as possible. Keep in mind, I'm getting, private message about, okay, I'm trying to. So now these solutions are my own solutions. When CodeHS wrote these questions, I can't say if they were trying to have it done the way I've done it here, but these are some of the solutions that I came up with. So double vowels. In this, a lot of them that I saw in Code HS this week involved making a resultant string, aka an empty string like I've done here on line 3, and then adding to it. If you didn't read, let me just talk about Code HS for a second, actually, sorry. When I'm doing it, I click this assignment tab, so I have like what's going on while I'm writing the question, writing my answer out. Then before I even think about submitting it, I do this test cases part, and I do the check unit tests. And then it's kind of like Java Bat, it can show me if I passed or failed. So anyway, for double vowels, I made a resultant string. If you didn't read this question, you're supposed to take this original string, and anytime there's a vowel in it, you put 2 vowels. So I first looped over all the letters in the string. I pulled out a single letter one at a time using substring. And no matter what, I'm going to add the letter to my result. No matter what, I have to add the letter to my result. So whether it's a vowel or a consonant or a symbol or something, I automatically added it. And then I said if A-E-I-O-U, aka the vowels, has the letter that I'm looking at, this basically means if the letter I'm currently looking at is a vowel, then add it again to the result. I probably wouldn't have used contains here, but it says hint strings have a contains method. So I was like, oh, I better use it. I could just as easily have changed this to index of and did greater than or equal to 0, because that's essentially what contains is. But I figured I'd use contains since it told me to. So essentially I'm adding every letter no matter what. And then if it's a vowel, that's what this if statement means. If A-E-I-O-U has the letter I'm looking at, then add it to the result. So that's what I came up with for that one. I'm just gonna tab through these here, make sure I do the brackets match. Oh my gosh, was this question not very similar to the delimiters one we looked at last week? I thought it was. I was like, huh, easy peasy, I've already been there. Double vowels, password checker, teen talk, password checker. Password checker is a great question, but I don't know how I can make it so that you can see all of mine unless I make it really tiny. This was a wonderful time to review how to use compare to. Let me explain what I did. They basically said if the password is, let me pull it up here. If the password has less than 8 characters, then it's not a good password. So I just check for that immediately because I don't want to do anything else if it's less than 8 letters. Then also it can only contain letters or numbers. So here's how I took care of that. I took each character and I made them lowercase just because it's easier to compare stuff when they're all in the same casing. It won't lowercase a number, don't worry. If you're wondering what lowercase 2 looks like, stop worrying. And now here's how I solved it. I use compare to say if, first of all, the characters between 0 and 9, or if the characters between A and Z. I don't have a ton of time to explain all of compare to if you can't remember how it works, but it's essentially how you kind of write a inequality using strings. And what it does is compare to gives you a numeric result. If you do A, the letter A dot compared to B, it's basically like A minus B. Well, A comes to the left in the alphabet compared to B, so that's going to give you some negative number. If you do B dot compared to A, B comes to the right in the alphabet, so it's got a little bit bigger numerical value. So B minus A would give you a positive value. And then if you do A dot compared to A, it's just going to be 0 if they're identical. So after I lowercased each character, I said, is it between 0 and 9? And this says, is it between A and Z? I suppose if I didn't lowercase everything, I could have had one more that checks if it's between capital A and capital Z as well. But then I knotted the whole thing. So I said, if a character is not between 0 and 9, or it's not between A and Z, then it's not a valid character, return false. Last thing I want to talk about is some people might just then do else return true. That's a really bad thing to do as well on this question, because if I just say else return true, I'm not going to check all of the characters. I'm only going to check the very first one. So you'll notice I didn't say that it was a valid password unless I went all the way through all the characters, and I still didn't find anything that was illegal. So writing this if statement was a little bit tricky, but I'm basically saying if the character is not between 0 and 9 and it's not between A and Z, then it's an invalid character. So that's a great question to go back over compared to if you like use the character capital C character class and did is letter and digit because you like looked on Stack Overflow or something. Way to be resourceful. I just wouldn't recommend doing it that way, because how much time did you waste trying to learn character dot is letter or digit? I wouldn't recommend it. Anyway, that's how I did it. See if it's between A and Z or 0 and 9. If it's not, return false. First and last. By the way, I'm recording it. If you don't catch everything, I'll record it and put up a recording here. You can always take a picture with your phone or something like that too, or a screenshot. They have this technology as well. First and last. What's this one supposed to do? It's supposed to the return the first and last character of the given string. So I use substring. The first character is always at 0, 1. The last character is always going to be at the length -1. You'll notice that on this one, I just use the single parameter substring method, which if you recall goes from that index all the way to the end. Since this is the index right before the end, it'll just give me the last character here. So that's what I ended up with for first and last. Obviously, this is the first character here, and then the last character. If I wanted to use the 2 parameter substring method, I could have done str.length as well. If you don't know the 1 parameter substring method, it's really helpful. It just goes from the index all the way to the end of the string. Maybe add it to that review sheet that you're creating. I don't like calling them cheat sheets. That's what people usually call them. Here it's like a help sheet. It's not illegal if you have your own review sheet. So I would make your own, like I said earlier, so you can rely on it on test day if you need to. Let's see, I did that double vowels. I did password checker first and last. There was a request for team talk. Let me see if I can. This Porky Pig one, I apologize. It was like the worst question of all time. Alt case. This alt case one uses 2 uppercase and 2 lowercase. Those are not part of the AP subset, but they can be useful. So, not a bad question. Teen Talk 1. By the way, how many of these did I use a resultant string? Let's see. Alt case, resultant string. Some of the other ones, resultant string. Teen Talk, resultant string. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's like making this. Can I make this bigger? Oh, he's done it. It's using this empty string. It's like setting a sum variable to 0, but for strings. You're just going to keep adding to it. It makes it so it can accumulate stuff on top of it. So I started an empty string that my plan is to add to. Then I looped over all of the characters in the sentence that I was given, this string parameter up here. And no matter what, I'm going to add that letter to my result. But if it was now this was highly judgmental. If you were offended by this because you're a teen and you don't say like, or you feel like you were unfairly generalized for using the word like, I feel you. And if you want to storm the Code HS offices, I'm busy on that day, but thanks for inviting me. So I pulled out a single letter. I always added it to the result. And then basically I said, if it's a space, then add the word like. So if you look at these here, it says, you know, can you believe that? And it's supposed to be, can like you like believe like that? I don't know. So basically I said, add the letters no matter what to the result, and then anytime you find a space, add the word like space there as well. Any other questions in chat or How am I doing? I'm doing okay. Really miss I miss tennis. Um, the USTA has come out and said don't play tennis because it can be spread on the balls, and obviously in the state of Michigan, the playing courts are closed. Even though I've seen people at the park over on Textile playing basketball, I've seen you. I've been on my bike. I've seen it. I know what you're doing. They cut the grass at the rec center. I didn't even know it was legal to cut grass. Maybe, I don't know. I was reading that Whitmer said that gyms are still going to be closed till May 15th. That probably applies to the tennis club as well because it's an indoor kind of spot. So I don't know. Maybe you'll be allowed to run outside or something. Travis Point's still open. That's illegal. I'm immediately reporting them to the. I won't. I won't. Don't. I'm not really gonna report them. Although they're a competitor of Huron Valley Tennis Club. What? Um. Okay. Well, the other thing that I mean, like 50,000 people have died. So when I'm like, oh, I miss tennis, I realize what I'm. I mean, my my missing tennis is not the same as, or me not being able to go outside and plant stuff in the snow is not the same as dying or being sick or getting somebody else sick. And so anyways, um, can you do array element repeat? Yes. Can you tell me where that's at though? Was that in this section? Array element repeat. I can do it, but I just don't know where it is. I'll practice. Okay, yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, yes, yes. Array element. Thank you for using the actual name so it's so easy for me to find. I appreciate that a lot. You know who you are. I'm just trying not to use your name because I'm not supposed to, but you know who you are, triple consonant person. Thank you. Okay. Write a method that takes two parameters, a string array and an int number repeats, representing the number of times to repeat the element in the array. Return a new array with each element repeated. Num repeats number of times. Okay, so if the original array contains hello world and 3, then each one of these gets repeated 3 times. So here's what I'm thinking in my head right now. I am going to need to make a new array. Since I can't resize arrays, I'm going to need to make a new array that's the original array's size times this number. And then I'm probably going to have in nested for loops. I'm going to have one for loop that pulls out the ith element in the original array, and then I'm going to have a second for loop that adds that ith or puts that ith element into the new array this number of times. So that's kind of the plan that I've come up with in my head. How did I come up with a plan like that so quickly? I don't know. Practice. That's the thing about doing all these. I know the Code HS ones aren't always so hard, but it's like, can you do one push-up? Yeah. Does that mean you understand a push-up? Sure. That why do people do more push-ups? So they get stronger. Why do people do more Code HS practice? So they get stronger up here. Okay, so I'm going to need a new array of strings. How about I call it new array? That's going to be the same size as the old array, but times num, what's that word? Num repeats. Okay. Okay. And so I think what I'm going to do is have one for loop that pulls out the ith element of array one at a time. Maybe I'll just say to add, I'll call it that. And then I'm going to have another for loop that adds it num repeats number of times to, how do I keep track of where in 0? Okay, check this out. Got an idea. It might be a bad idea. I've got a better idea. Don't worry. and I want it to go less than num repeats number of times, and do j++. The only thing I'm thinking is I need to have like some counter of where I'm currently at in the new array. Maybe I'm going to do current index or something. And so every time I add an element, I increment the current index. So I'm going to say new array sub current index equals to add, and then I'll increment the current index. I could probably do current index plus plus right there. I don't know about that one. I don't think this is going to pass all test cases, by the way. I'm not the smartest person in the world. Just, let's see. Oh, when it works though, the first time. I know what you're thinking. I've already done all these and I have the solution book out in front of me. It's don't believe what you read. So I said the new array is going to be what the original was times the number of repeats. I loop through all of the ith elements in the array. I pull out one element at a time that I'm going to add. And then how many times do I want to add it? I want to add it num repeats, number of times. So that's why I have this nested for loop in here. The only thing that I probably could have related I and j in some way and num repeats, come up with some mathematical equation to figure out where it's supposed to go in the new array, but it's going to be a lot easier if I just have some variable counting how many elements I've already added to new array. Keep track of that. So thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'll do one. Pick one of those, and then I gotta stop. Pick one of those. I think it's gonna snow in June. Yo, given what's going on this year, like anything could happen. It could snow in June. It could snow in July. It could snow in August. Pigs flying. I mean, like, I don't know. How do you say what could or could not happen? Even up. Okay, this is the last one I'm going to do. I know I'm a little over time. If you have to go, I understand. But I'm doing the string loops one. The fact that people are asking me to do these, I know I put it on the classroom that I'm impressed with you guys, but I am truly impressed with how hard you guys are working. So, like, seriously, keep it up. You guys are doing great. Okay, school newspaper wants to publish a story with all of the even index characters, including 0 in uppercase and all the odd index characters in lowercase, kind of like this. Return the decimal percentage that represents how many characters in the phrase are correct. Wow. So I'm thinking, here's what I'm thinking for this one. I can think through these relatively quickly because I just have practice. I'm going to make a counter that's going to count up the number that are in the correct spot. I'm going to write a for loop, like an for I loop. And anytime that I is even, I'm going to see if the uppercase version of the character matches the character that currently is. If I is odd, I'm going to see if it matches the lowercase version of what it currently is. And if so, I'll increment the counter. And then at the end, wow, this is a great question. Okay, anyways. So I make my for loop. This is a great one. If you guys didn't get to do this one, and you're not watching me right now, you can pause the video and maybe try this one on your own. Why do I have j++ here? I see it. Okay. So I'll say something like, well, let me get a single letter. Okay. Again, I know we're in overtime. If you have to go, that's fine. I'm going to say if I is even. Means it's an even character. I would recommend you have this on whatever note sheet, review sheet you're making, how to check if a number is even or if a number is odd. That would probably be something that should be in there. If it's odd, I only want to add to my counter, excuse me, if I is even, I only want to add to my counter if it's uppercase. So I'll say if letter dot equals letter dot to uppercase. Then increment my counter. Then I can say else, which would mean the odd case. If you want to know it's I mod 2 does not equal 0, I could say if letter dot equals letter dot to lower case, then increment my counter. So I think that part probably works. See if the current letter is equal to its uppercase or lowercase version. And then at the end, I have to do the percentage. So I would have to do count divided by phrase.length. And since those are both ints, I think I have to cast one of them as a double, or maybe more easily, I could just multiply by 1.0. Again, I don't know. You forgot a parend? You saw that. That was not on me. That was on Code HS. I'll take that to the grave. Line 10, I forgot a parend. You seeing this? Look at the parend I forgot on line 10. I have a hard time believing that. I'm missing a parenthesis here. Oh my gosh. That's on Code HS. Yo, you saw that. That's on Code HS. Sometimes they add the parentheses, and the one time I do a problem in front of my classroom, they don't add the parentheses. Okay, I see where you're coming from, Code HS. I see you. Okay, that's all I have time for. I'm over time. I've recorded this. I'll put it up. You guys are doing awesome. Next week, we're going to switch to the second type of question. I'm also supposedly going to know more about the test format next week that I'll be able to share with you. Miss McLaughlin is sending out emails, and she's concerned that people are not reading them. If Miss McLaughlin sends you an AP email, I know you guys get a lot of emails. I'm trying not to send too many, maybe 2, maybe 3 a week maximum. But please read those from her. I truly do miss you folks. Every time I do one of these, I realize how much I miss being in the classroom and seeing you guys. I hope you're all doing okay. I will see you next time. Have a wonderful weekend, and thanks for joining me. Adios, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. Bye.
You're very welcome. Bye.